Welcome to the most important week of the year for the podcast industry. Welcome to Podcast Movement 2025.
Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Nadine Robinson and I'm one of the co-founders of Podcast Nation. I'm really excited to kick off this conversation that we're calling Keep Your Friends Close and Your Competitors Closer, which should be fun. I hope it's fun today. As you can see, we have a great lineup, and I don't want to do too much of the talking today because I want to pass it on to these guys pretty quickly. But I just wanted to share one anecdote that why this topic is so important to me. And it's actually a topic that I've been thinking about in terms of collaborating with your so-called competitors for quite a few years now. And so I'll just share a quick little story. So it was 2020 and COVID had essentially just hit. We were about a year into our essentially launching the podcasting division of our company, and the world shut down, and it felt like every advertiser that we had booked for our shows was all of a sudden canceling. And we were essentially just scrambling to try and find solutions for these shows that we'd made commitments to. And the most helpful resources that we found in the end were other networks that were technically so-called competitor networks that were just really helpful. They shared their knowledge, they shared their time with us, and they actually helped us secure revenue for our shows that in sources that we didn't even know existed at the time. So they could have taken advantage of us. They could have just ignored us. That would have been easy to do. But in every case, everyone was just really, really helpful. And in one case, it ended up being a formal partnership with another network that I think ended up being really beneficial for them as well. So it really just shifted my mindset and made me want to be continuously open to these types of collaborations and partnerships with who you might see as a competitor in the space. But this panel is not necessarily about my story, and that's why these three guys are here today, and I really want them to introduce themselves to you. I think the point of the conversation is not just to talk about the mindset of being open to collaborating with your competitors, but also what this actually looks like. Like what is the nitty-gritty of having these types of partnerships, what works, what doesn't work, what to look out for. So without further ado, I'll have the guys introduce themselves. Jeremy, do you want to start?
Yes, I'm Jeremy. I'm from Red Circle. Red Circle is a hosting distribution platform as well as an ad platform. We have historically operated as a network as well, and so we have plenty of experience in this conversation, I would say.
Right.
But we also support a lot of the networks, all the networks on stage now, and a lot of networks that are here.
I'm Alan Abdeen. I'm with YMH Studios, which is a kind of comedy-centric, comedian-centric podcasting network. We started about a year and a half ago. Prior to that, I was with Rooster Teeth. 14 years ago, I started at Rooster Teeth and helped them create a podcasting business, an ad business, converting them from what we called the currency of the internet at the time, which was DVDs and T-shirts, into a full-fledged ad business, ad-centric business. And I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to go back into entrepreneur mode about a year and a half ago to build a podcasting network for Tom Segura in Austin, Texas.
Great.
Hi, I'm Steve Wilson. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at QCode Media. We're a podcast production media company. We're known for our scripted fiction originals, but we run a podcast network as well. And I've been in the industry a long time. Prior to QCode, I was at Apple for about 15 years, where I worked on editorial and partner relations. And a fun thing about that job is, of course, I got to work with everyone in the podcast industry as a platform. So fun shift for me moving to the publisher side of the industry and working with folks in a different way. Great.
Thank you. I thought we'd start off with what essentially a collaboration with a competitor can actually look like. Alan, I'm going to get you to take on this first one, or start
Awesome.
with this first one, and then we'll see what the other guys have to add.
Yeah, it's really easy to look at your competitors as like, I have to do everything in my power to block them out or to operate in a way that's competitive, right? And what I learned very quickly, especially with this second opportunity to build something, is that there is a strategic way to work with competitors that allows us to scale in a way that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. In this particular case, working with Red Circle as a strategic ad sales partner, I have an incredible in-house ad sales team But when given the choice of hiring a bunch of additional people to build new relationships that we don't already have, and or working with somebody who already has some of those established relationships in a strategic way where we're not overlapping, but we're utilizing the best efforts on both sides, that was a kind of a no-brainer, the aha moment. Actually, Jeremy's a very good salesperson and pitched me on this concept. I'm like, I don't know if I totally trust you, but I'm going to give you a chance. We'll stress test this a bit, and it ended up working incredibly well to the point where I'm up on the stage talking about the benefits and merits of working with competitors.
Yes, and I would say it was a year ago that you and I had a conversation. You said you need to talk to Jeremy at Red Circle, and I didn't know what that would look like, but it has been a great partnership for us as well. So you vouching for another partner in the space has been really beneficial to us as well.
It's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe I'll just touch on that. We're constantly trying to bring new brands into the podcasting space, and I think we view a lot of our partnerships here as a way in which we can build the industry together. So if there are more brands coming into podcasting, then it's easier for them to participate and purchase shows and test in shows. That's good for everybody, not just Red Circle or not just for YMH, but the whole industry as a whole.
Great. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and we're partners with Red Circle as well, and that's been a newer relationship for us, but we're thrilled with the results so far. Overall, this isn't a zero-sum game. Like, some people don't have to lose for us all to benefit. In fact, I think overall we're all in this room trying to make more money, and the more successful that the podcast medium is, the more brands that are active in the space. Frankly, our biggest competition is people not listening to podcasts or not aware of podcasts. So, I think we all should celebrate wins to be able to bring in more dollars to the industry.
Great. You all have mentioned that you've worked in the space for quite some time in various ways before you're sort of in your current positions now. I'm wondering if you've noticed any shifts in the industry in general, and if you've seen it evolve. Maybe, Jeremy, I'll start with you with this one. Was there a point when your personal perspective of collaboration changed, and what would you say triggered that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us, we started to realize in order to work with particular brands, we needed to provide, we'll call it like supply or more podcasts, right?
Yeah.
And so in order to do that, we needed to find partners to partner with in order to attract larger and larger brands. And so that was kind of our aha. It's like, okay, we're not going to be able to do this together. We need to find partners, and that's kind of what we set out to do. Yeah.
Great.
What I've seen is sort of the evolution of what a podcast is. Like when I first started, it's an audio format, but we started at Rooster Teeth as audio and video, which was a foreign concept to most of the brands and agencies that we were working with. And so I think the industry has really done a good job in sort of like pushing the boundaries of what a podcast is, blurring the lines in many ways, to the point where now I think we're kind of on the other side of that, where there's an existential crisis of like, well, is a video podcast really a podcast, or is that YouTube content or whatever? And I'm like, I don't know if that's necessarily something that we need to, overly think. I think there's space in this industry for a lot of different formats. The other thing I think is really interesting to see through sort of the last 14, 15 years I've been in this industry is more of these sort of like larger brand awareness types of brands coming in. And that's actually one of the things about Red Circle that really intrigued me, is that they had relationships that I've been pursuing. I've been trying to break into, and they were successful at breaking into some of these budgets that were usually allocated primarily for YouTube. And I'm thinking, wow, like that's kind of a no-brainer. If I can fast track my way into some of those new dollars that, because obviously we all know the performance marketing agencies, and we all work with them, but hitting that holy grail of those brand dollars with the larger brands was something that was always very important to me. And that's why I think that the relationship that we have with Red Circle is so beneficial.
Yeah, great.
I would just add a little bit there too. Is I think there has been a big change within advertisers and the industry, and it's a good sign because I think this industry was built on D2C brands and performance-driven brands, and now we're seeing the Fortune 100s come in and recognize that this channel is a channel they need to be in. They obviously operate a lot differently, but it's an important next step in the industry that had to happen. It also it very much validates what we're doing in the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's like we're all on the same team to bring more dollars and more eyes into this industry, and so if we can work together to do that, I think everyone can benefit from that.
There's certainly, I'd add, like an evolution in how people collaborate across the marketing side of the industry as well. You go back to 2013 or so, pre-serial, and in many ways, people weren't as aware of podcasts as a medium as they are today. People would be focused on marketing their own shows, and there was a rise of cross-promotions and collaborations across the networks. And I think that's even accelerated with some platforms like Podroll, which has formalized that process, and people can use to buy or exchange cross-promotions between networks. And I think that's a really exciting thing. I think, again, as I said before, the idea that more people listening to podcasts is a beneficial thing to everyone. And when we're now in 2025 in an era where podcasting is mainstream, the medium's bigger than it's ever been before. But I would actually say I think we could go further in how we work together across marketing. There's some weird refrains in the industry, like where are the hits anymore? And some of the shows that came out in that maybe prior area, the S-Towns and Dolly Parton's America and Shrink Next Door and Dirty John and Dr. Death. We have great shows coming out now, but I don't think they're getting the same sort of attention as they could by way of us maybe all working together to focus on these great moments in podcasting. Things like Taylor Swift going on New Heights is actually a win for everyone, even though that's not a show we work with, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, so let's talk about some rules and boundaries that maybe each of us likes to think about and follow when we're thinking about these types of partnerships. Steve, I'll let you start with this one. When collaborating with a partner or a competitor, do you have an unspoken rule that you follow, and are there boundaries that you found helpful in maintaining trust?
I mean, it's a really great question. I'm struggling to think if I have, honestly, a really great answer for you. I mean, certainly there's some areas of kind of concern that you would think about, like access to data or personal information, right? When you're sharing across companies, we take privacy of our hosts, for example, very seriously, and would want to think about those kinds of things regarding like technical infrastructure. What data does a partner have from our company and vice versa? Those are probably some guardrails that I think we would look at when evaluating how we're going to work with someone else.
Great. Alan or no?
I think for me, it's really important that there's a clear line of communication up front. Okay, this is what our relationship is, and these are the brands that are protected on our end and protected on the other side, and being committed to those boundaries. If Red Circle brings in a new advertiser, it's not really supportive of the relationship. If I'm like going directly to the advertiser, I'm like, you can just come straight to us and get a better rate. Like that's. I think there's a part of it, like you have to go into the relationship with optimism and some level of initial trust, but you also have to kind of test it out and make sure that everyone's playing by the same rules. And my experience has been, if you over-communicate in the beginning and are very clear about sort of these are the boundaries, this is what is important to us in terms of expanding this relationship in the future, then over time you get more confident in just releasing those concerns and anxieties that you might have had up front, since you didn't have any experience with them prior to that. So in the case with Red Circle, we were very good about, okay, these are the brands and agencies that we already work with. So anything outside of this list, we're open to the conversation, and then we go through our and actually you actually operate more as an agency in a certain sense, because we're getting the same brand approvals and all that as we normally would. It just happens to come from a quote competitor.
Yeah, I often think it's short-sighted to not be just really upfront with expectations, and then everyone can win.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Anything to add, Jeremy?
I was That's absolutely correct.
Yeah, okay. So one thing that we think about sometimes as a network is like what makes us unique. Obviously, we can be viewed as competitors in a lot of ways, but we're also unique businesses, different focuses, different strengths. Essentially, when do you keep information private for the competitive advantage, and when do you share it? Whoever wants to jump in on this one, how do you decide what to share and what to keep internal?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in on this one. I kind of sometimes lean towards probably oversharing in general, but I think there's real power in that. I think, Alan, I think you touched on this sort of establishing trust and transparency where you can is sometimes really useful. Comparing notes on kind of how you're thinking about the space can be really useful. We were chatting a little bit yesterday. We're doing more and more social sales, and this is a real strength of Podcast Nation. And sort of picking each other's brains professionally in terms of how you think about different categories or problem sets, I think is really useful. There's no new idea oftentimes under the sun, as they say. So, having an open, perspective on the idea that sharing a little bit of information and comparing notes isn't like giving away your secret sauce of how you work in many ways. Right. And so I default towards sometimes sharing a little bit more, but of course, there's proprietary information or financial data that's a little bit more sensitive. So just thinking about it sort of in that category of talking about the ideas versus sometimes the exact tactics is useful.
Yeah. Great. Actually, Alan, you and I were having a conversation yesterday about, just because you share some information, some tips that may have worked for you, it doesn't mean that it's easy to pull off, right? So just because you're open with information, I think that it's easier often said than done to pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we all have our zones of genius, our superpowers in the space. And if you're confident with what you've built and what you have, I mean, there's just some intrinsic value that you have, because otherwise you wouldn't exist. And I mean, we've added 15 shows in a year and a half, and it's because we are good at what we do. But it doesn't mean that, like, if I talk on a panel about some of the things, like specifics, like yesterday I was talking about how to win big accounts, how to compete for big accounts, and I was thinking to myself, like, should I give away all my secrets? But then I'm like, wait a minute. I mean, we're very competitive. I mean, even if I talk about some of the specific tactics that I use when going after big partnerships, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone can emulate that, because they're not us, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a personality and a brand that we all have that has the intrinsic value to where I'm confident enough in ourselves to be able to work with competitors without worrying about, they're going to steal my secret sauce.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you've been working on building your network for years, right? It's not like day one, someone's just going to come and replicate that. And I think we all are confident in our own businesses, and we all have our own niche, and we're developing those niches. And so every single day we're building a competitive moat. And so sharing information isn't a big deal.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about what could potentially go wrong. I don't know if any of you guys have some examples for this piece, or feel comfortable sharing. Don't have to name names, of course. But what has there been an instance when the collaboration has gone wrong for you, and what happened, and what did you learn from it? Or has everything gone right every time for all of you?
I would just say one thing to understand with collaboration is the incentives of the other side. Sometimes you make assumptions that, somebody has the same incentives as you, and they don't. And then you need to change your tactic or decide maybe this partner isn't the right partner for me, I think, without going into specifics.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think the assumption thing, I mean, at the end of the day, we've all made such, spectacular choices in our business. No, we don't have any bad stories to tell. No, I think that going back to the over communication, it's a mistake to assume that they understand our brand and our shows as well as we do. So that's a potential risk and pitfall, is when you kind of go in without like selling your own or ensuring that they're sellers and that they understand who we are, and that saves time on both sides versus saying, no, it's not a good match, it's not a good match. Educating your partner early and being more hands-on and proactive on the early stages will, I think, shield you, or at least, buffer the risk in the future where, you're being misrepresented in the marketplace. Also, I think there's a risk of confusing the marketplace. Like, wait a minute, who's selling
Totally.
YMH's shows, So ensuring that the messaging is set up in a way so that it doesn't create unnecessary market confusion. I think those are potential pitfalls. Luckily, we haven't experienced that. So, knock on wood. But I think those are definitely potential risks that are important to address early on in the partnership.
Yes, you don't want it to be like a race to the bottom where someone's shopping around the lowest rate they can possibly get. That just hurts our industry, I think. Anything to add to that, Steve?
Maybe I would just add to this on our end. We built a network over the last 2 years. QCode's now number 4 on Podscribe for audio and video. Rep a whole range of shows from really big ones like Jon Stewart and The Weekly Show to some emerging creators with frankly really small shows. And sometimes a challenge for us in those kind of content partnerships and the shows we're signing is around some of the stuff we've talked about here, expectation setting, and frankly, sometimes it's a need to build a little bit better of an internal litmus test for us in terms of what shows we'll partner with, whether their expectations on revenue and audience, for example. We certainly come from a perspective that we want everyone to win and all of our partners to win, but at times, you can get outside the bounds of maybe what you can actually provide for a show, and their expectations may be higher than what you can deliver based on where they're at. So just would add that from more of the content relations perspective in the industry. I think it can be really tempting to try and help everyone equally, and just the nature of life is that's usually not possible. So we've touched on the idea of clear communication and expectation setting. I think that really extends also into content partnerships from the network perspective into the shows that they're working with.
Right. Actually, that leads perfectly into what I was going to ask next, which is, do you think there's room for collaboration across networks of all sizes, or is the gap between smaller and larger players too wide?
I certainly think that there is, across all categories. I think, again, the big things that we're all probably in this room thinking a lot about is audience and revenue. And, speaking for us in QCode, we're working with so many different companies, be it Paramount or independent podcast networks that might need services in one particular category. In the instance of a smaller network, they might not want to hire a sales team, right? And so them going out and be able to partner with us so that they can focus on creating great content is a huge win for them, and frankly for us as well. So we can lean into our superpower and monetization. Be a strategic advisor for them in audience development, and then they can just keep focusing on making great shows.
Right.
I'm going to take a slightly contrarian perspective on that. I think that's possible to work with, we're smaller, we're a very small boutique network. And while it's possible to work with the bigger, like maybe the mega companies, what I find is that they're more rigid in their structure and how they work. And what I like about working with smaller companies, small to mid-sized companies, is that there's more of a collaborative spirit, and there's more of a shared sort of like willingness to adapt to the marketplace versus forcing the other side to work within their structure, because they can't change. They can't pivot as quickly as the smaller to medium-sized companies. So my experience has been working again, using Red Circle as an example. As the industry evolves, they're more flexible at being responsive to that versus me trying to convince a mega network to change something so that it works for us. They're like, that's not worth our time. Whereas I do think it's worth the time when you're a smaller size.
Yeah, it's so much easier to pivot when you're smaller and be nimble.
Yeah, I could just echo that, and I've had experience working in large companies before, starting Red Circle, and it's, there's oftentimes a top-down strategy that doesn't allow for flexibility, and folks have, again, understanding the incentives of the folks that you're working with. They may have different KPIs than you do.
Yeah.
And so when you have relationships and you're in a more mid-sized company, it is easier to work together and align and communicate and
Yeah,
do all
adapt
the
your
things.
systems.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Great. Okay, so we got to the last question that we have planned. And actually, Steve, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I was wondering, where do you think, and this is to anyone who wants to jump in, where do you think there's an opportunity for our industry to evolve in terms of opportunities? Steve, you were mentioning the marketing and promotional piece, I think. How do you think that we can push further than we have already?
Yeah, maybe I'll continue on that thread
Yeah.
a little bit. So as I mentioned, my background doing editorial at Apple was looking after all the content that was on the front page, sort of editor of the magazine there. And, for a long time, that was a lot of fun. I got to sort of represent the podcast industry across, major networks like the iHearts of the world, but the new emerging platforms like Wondery and Gimlet and, other companies. And I think that sort of era was marked by, a lot of just sort of discovery in the podcast industry. And I mentioned this before, but we're kind of at a time where the industry feels more fragmented. You don't necessarily see Apple Podcasts being able to represent everything that's happening on the video side. Mm-hmm. And about 80% of our network is actually, video and YouTube first. So, you have that challenge, and Apple's also focused on subscriptions in many ways. Spotify is very focused on video and algorithmic. I definitely think that, there's an opportunity for us to all collaborate in a real editorial and discovery fashion. Again, these big moments that happen in podcasting should all be celebrated by all of us. I text Alan when there's a great viral clip from Tom Segura on Instagram that I just think is so cool, and that again just benefits us all. So, I don't have all the ideas right now, but I'm sort of really tempted to try and put back on that editorial hat, as it were, and try and find ways for us to more formally collaborate and bring greater discovery for the podcast industry and all the great moments that are happening, so that consumers really understand the landscape today, right? There's so many great shows, but there is this sort of fragmented feeling of where people are thinking about and looking at podcasts.
It always still amazes me that shows will come across our desk that I've never heard of before that have a great audience, great content, and it's just there is so much out there. It is hard. It is a challenge of the industry for sure.
I would just add, I think the podcasting ecosystem is very unique in that there is no specific walled garden that controls the industry. And so to Steve's point, that's an opportunity, but it also creates some chaos. There are lots of different ways to do video podcasting. There's lots of different platforms to place your audio on, and it can be a little confusing. So I think the more we align on our messaging to the larger ecosystem, the better. But it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to being receptive to change in the industry, not fighting change, but like being open-minded about it. And I think that the more companies on both the buying and selling side, or in the production side, are open and willing to embrace the evolution of the industry versus like, no, this is the way we do it, and that's the only way we do it, and that's what a podcast is. That's what prevents us from working together in more meaningful ways. And so I'm just hoping that the industry as a whole is moving towards a direction in which we are more open-minded about what a podcast can be and how we can work together. And I think when you keep these rigid ideas and structures in place unnecessarily, that's what prevents these types of collaborations, because that's not the way we do it. That's Spotify thing is a great example. It's very controversial, but it's something that if you embrace it and if you look for ways of of working within that, it's not so problematic.
Yeah, I was just going to provide some anecdote of how this industry has changed from the buy side, where it's okay, we only can buy baked in. Now dynamics, okay, well, what about video? We don't buy video, but we want the audio. It's like, well, don't you just want the audience of this? Who this?
And now they love the video.
Yeah, and so it's there has to be a willingness to change, and sometimes that's slow.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I think we're just about out of time, so we'll wrap it up. Thank you to Steve, Alan, and Jeremy for being here.
Thank you.